The final week before my wedding was supposed to be filled with joy, excitement, and the anticipation of a new life with the man I thought I would spend forever with. Derek and I had been together for 3 years. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but what relationship is? We had our ups and downs, but we laughed together, shared dreams, and talked about the future. I thought we understood each other. I thought I was marrying a man who would stand by me no matter what. But everything changed a week before our wedding. Derek's parents, Ruth and Walter, didn't exactly like me. Ruth looked at me like I wasn't good enough for her precious son. I was from a simple, working-class family, and they made sure I knew it. Walter, on the other hand, was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was usually to complain about kids these days, or boast about his expensive car collection. They thought Derek could do better, but Derek reassured me time and time again that it didn't matter. They'd come around eventually. He promised me that their disapproval wouldn't change anything. Then came the family trip. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway for Derek before the wedding. According to him, it was nothing more than a last-minute trip to Miami. A break from the wedding stress. At first, I didn't think much of it. We were both busy, and Derek's parents were never too fond of me. Maybe this was their attempt at reconnecting with their son before he got tied down. I didn't want to argue, especially so close to our wedding, so I let him go. But looking back, I should have known something was wrong. Derek left for Miami on a Thursday. By Saturday night, I was already feeling uneasy. It wasn't like him to leave without a proper goodbye, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then my best friend, Che, called me from Miami. She worked at a bar downtown, a place where the wealthy and flashy gathered. "Hey, isn't Derek supposed to be getting married next weekend?" she asked. "Yeah, why?" I replied. "I think I just saw him with his parents and some girl." My stomach dropped. She had described Derek, his parents, and the girl, a young blonde with a fake tan and a short dress. Someone who didn't seem like she just happened to be sitting near them. Ruth and Walter were all over this girl, laughing with her, asking her questions. Derek wasn't exactly pushing her away either. In fact, he seemed completely comfortable with her. My mind raced. I felt the blood drain from my face as the realization hit. It wasn't just a family trip. They had planned this. They wanted Derek to meet someone new. They were trying to replace me before the wedding, before I even had the chance to walk down the aisle. It wasn't just a trip. It was a setup. I didn't know what to do next. My mind was spinning, and I couldn't breathe. I hung up the phone with Chia and sat on my couch in silence. The weight of it all crushed me. For a long time, I just sat there, unable to move, unable to think clearly. But then I got mad, really mad. When I get mad, focus. I get determined. And right then, I decided that I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. I wasn't going to let Derek or his parents think they could ruin my life without consequences. I called a private investigator in Miami, someone who specialized in relationship issues. I paid him extra to follow Derek and his family, to make sure I had the proof I needed. By Monday afternoon, I had the first batch of photos. By Tuesday, I had video footage. And by Wednesday, I had a full report. Photos of Derek and that girl together, laughing, sitting close, acting as if nothing was wrong. Ruth and Walter were right there, encouraging it all. I hadn't told anyone yet. I didn't want to make a scene. Not yet. I wanted to wait for the right moment to expose everything. The night Derek came back from Miami, I was ready. I was calm, at least on the outside. I had spent days gathering information, watching Derek's every move. And now, it was time to face him. He came over the next morning. He was quiet, distant, avoiding my gaze. I made coffee like nothing had changed, trying to act like everything was fine. I didn't want him to know that I knew. Not yet. "So, how was the trip?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It was fine. Derek replied. His voice sounded off. He looked nervous, his movements jerky. Then, after a long pause, he said, I think we should take a break. A break. 6 days before the wedding, I could feel my heart sinking. But I didn't let it show. I didn't ask him why. I didn't ask what had changed. I just smiled, a cold smile, and slid the folder across the table toward him. That's funny, I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. I just got some information on that trip. Derek picked up the folder, his face unreadable at first. Then, as he flipped through the photos, his face slowly turned white. His eyes widened as the truth sunk in. He looked at the photos again and again, as if hoping they would change. But they didn't. And then the front door opened. Ruth and Walter walked in, just as if it were any normal day. Ruth, ever the control freak, was carrying her wedding planner, and Walter was distracted by his phone. Ruth looked at Derek, then at the folder, and finally at me sitting there, coffee in hand, watching the entire scene unfold. A tense silence filled the room. No one spoke for what felt like an eternity. Then, Derek finally found his voice. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his eyes burning with fury. He wasn't asking me. He was asking his parents. Ruth laughed it off, trying to brush it under the rug. "Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic." But Derek didn't back down. "How did you get these?" he demanded. "I didn't get them," I replied coldly. "Your parents did." Ruth's fake smile faltered as she glanced at Walter. Neither of them said a word. Walter pretended not to hear. Ruth tried to deflect, but Derek was no longer listening. His face was red with embarrassment and rage as the truth hit him like a ton of bricks. "Mom," he said softly, his voice shaking. "What the hell did you do?" Derek stood frozen, the photos still in his hands. His eyes darted between the images and his parents. Confusion and disbelief written all over his face. It was as if the man I had known for 3 years had suddenly vanished, leaving behind a stranger who didn't know what to believe. I don't understand," Derek muttered, his voice trembling with anger. "Mom, Dad, why would you do this? You promised me you wouldn't interfere." Ruth, ever the manipulator, stood up from her chair and put on a fake smile. "Don't be so dramatic. Derek, you're making this a bigger deal than it is. You know how weddings can be stressful. We just thought it would be nice if you met someone new before you tied yourself down." Before Derek could respond, Walter, who had been silent up until now, finally looked up from his phone. He adjusted his tie, almost like he was preparing for a meeting at work. "We were thinking long term, Derek," he said coolly, his tone detached. "You can't rush into marriage. It's important to make sure you're making the right choice." I stared at them both, my hands shaking with fury. "So, what? You thought you could replace me with some random woman. You thought you could bring Derek to Miami and just swap me out before the wedding." Ruth, feigning innocence, waved a hand dismissively. "You're overreacting. We just wanted Derek to meet a few new people, see what's out there. You wouldn't understand. It's about the future, about making sure he doesn't settle for someone who isn't right for him." I could feel my blood boiling. Every word that came out of Ruth's mouth was designed to twist the truth, to make me feel like I was the one who was unreasonable. I was ready to explode, but I held it in. I wanted to make sure they heard me, really heard me. "You paid her, didn't you?" I snapped, looking directly at Ruth. "You paid Madison to come on this trip, didn't you? You paid her to get close to Derek, to make him think that she was better than me." Ruth stiffened, but didn't deny it. She only looked at me with that same calculating gaze. "Well, we gave her a little incentive. she said, her voice dripping with arrogance. Nothing too serious. A few gifts, some spending money. You know how it is. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just a case of family meddling. This was calculated, malicious behavior. They weren't just trying to stop a wedding. They were trying to sabotage my entire future. Derek's face was now flushed with embarrassment, but he still hadn't said a word. He looked at his parents, his eyes wide with disbelief. I didn't know anything about this, he muttered. I didn't know they paid her. Of course you didn't, Ruth said, her tone dismissive. You wouldn't understand. You've been too busy with wedding plans to notice what's really important. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. It was becoming clear to me now. They never wanted me to marry Derek. They wanted him to marry someone who suited their image of the perfect daughter-in-law. Someone with class. Someone who could fit into their high society life. Is this what you've been doing, Derek? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. You've been letting them play you like a pawn in their game. Derek opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there, staring at his parents, unable to look at me. I knew in that moment that the man I had thought I was going to marry was lost to me. Whether he had known about the plot or not, he had allowed his parents to manipulate him. And me, I couldn't take it anymore. Enough, I said, my voice breaking through the tension. I'm done with all of this. I grabbed my phone from the counter, pulling up the private investigator's full report. You think this is over? I said, showing Derek the screen. This is just the beginning. You don't get to walk away from this so easily. The photos of Derek and Madison. The video of Ruth's manipulative words. Everything was right there on my phone, ready to be exposed. This wasn't just a betrayal by Derek's parents. It was the final nail in the coffin of a relationship that had already been tainted by lies and deceit. I felt the room go cold as I hit send. The images, the video, the full report, they were on their way. I had made sure of that. My best friend, Chill, had already shared it with a few trusted contacts. The whole world would know what Derek's parents had done. As I stood there, watching the disbelief and anger spread across Derek's face, I knew there was no going back. The silence between us grew unbearable, each of us waiting for the other to speak. Derek finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want this. I never wanted this. I laughed bitterly, unable to contain the sarcasm that bubbled up. You didn't want this. Well, it seems like you didn't want me. Ada, Ruth's eyes narrowed as she saw the direction I was taking. She wasn't afraid. She had always believed she could control everything, even the people in her life. But now it was clear. This time, she wasn't in control. You think you can just ruin everything. Ruth sneered. We were only trying to help you. Derek, don't let her manipulate you. She's just throwing a tantrum. I turned to her, eyes blazing. Help him. You've been doing nothing but manipulating him since the day I met you. You tried to ruin our wedding, our future. All for what? So you could play matchmaker with some random woman. Walter finally stood up, his patience clearly worn thin. We're not going to sit here and let you cause a scene, he growled. I took a deep breath, staring at the man who had tried to pass off his son's happiness as some kind of social experiment. The scene has already been made, I said coldly. You don't get to walk away from this. That's when I felt the shift. Ruth's expression faltered. Walter's rigid posture loosened. They were realizing, too late, that they had underestimated me, that they had underestimated how far I was willing to go to expose the truth. I'm not backing down, I said, looking at Derek one last time. And neither should you. As I turned to walk out, I caught the briefest glimpse of Derek's face, caught between his mother's influence and the wreckage of what had once been our love. I could feel the walls closing in on him. It wasn't just his family that had betrayed me. It was him, too. And yet, I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for him. The tension in the room was unbearable. As I left the living room, I could feel the weight of Derek's gaze on my back. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say, but there was more to this story. Much more. I could feel the storm brewing inside me. It wasn't just about Derek and his parents anymore. This was about me, about reclaiming control, about showing them that they couldn't just steamroll over me and my future. They had underestimated me at every turn, thinking I'd be too heartbroken to stand up for myself, too weak to fight back. But I wasn't that person anymore. I walked to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to make sure Derek knew exactly what kind of family he was choosing over me. And Ruth needed to understand that she couldn't dictate the course of my life. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I made calls. The private investigator's full report was a weapon, and I wasn't going to let it go to waste. She had already done her part, but I needed to take it further. I sent everything to my best friend, Tina, my maid of honor, and told her to meet me the next morning. I had a plan, one that would leave no room for doubt. The next day, I called Derek, Ruth, Walter, and Madison to the wedding venue for an urgent meeting about the ceremony. I had already made sure everything was set up. Chairs were arranged. Tables for guests were being prepared. It felt surreal standing there as the venue staff worked, knowing that the wedding that was supposed to be my big day was actually going to be the setting for the ultimate showdown. At noon, they all arrived. Ruth looked smug. Walter looked irritated. Derek looked exhausted. And Madison. She walked in with that smug little smirk of someone who thought she had already won. She was dressed like she thought she was the bride, in a short white dress, heels too high, and makeup that screamed, "Look at me." When she saw me, she raised an eyebrow, clearly unbothered. "I didn't realize this was a group meeting," she said loudly, trying to show off her confidence. I didn't flinch. Instead, I said, "Yeah, I figured we'd clear the air." I opened my laptop and connected it to the venue's projector. The screen came to life with the first photo. Derek and Madison by the pool, laughing. Clearly close. I could see Derek's face. But it was different from the one I remembered. It was a face I didn't recognize. Then came the second slide. Ruth and Madison at the bar, enjoying drinks together, laughing like old friends. Ruth's hand was placed on Madison's shoulder, an intimate gesture that spoke volumes about their relationship. The third slide hit hardest. Madison kissing Derek on the cheek while Walter watched. Ruth was nowhere in the frame, but the look on Walter's face, proud, almost pleased, told me everything I needed to know. The room was silent, the photos speaking louder than any words ever could. I clicked play on the video. The sound of Ruth's voice echoed through the room. "Once this little wedding blows over, you and Derek will have all the time in the world." That was it. The dam broke. Ruth stood up from her chair, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "We didn't do anything wrong. Derek doesn't even care about her. You're just making a scene." I looked her dead in the eye. You paid her to break us up, to ruin my life. "And you think I'm the one making a scene?" Madison, who had been looking smug throughout the entire ordeal, suddenly looked uneasy. She stood up, flicking her hair back, trying to maintain her composure. "Well, I wouldn't say half of South Beach knows, but yeah, it's not exactly a secret," she said, as if trying to justify her actions. Tina, who had been silent up until this point, finally let out a sarcastic laugh. "Jesus, you really thought you could get away with this? You really thought no one would find out?" Then Derek, who had been sitting there, frozen, finally spoke. But it wasn't what I expected. "I think we should all just go our separate ways," he said, his voice cold and detached. I stared at him in disbelief. This was it. the moment I realized the truth. Derek wasn't going to stand up for me. Not now, not ever. This wasn't just Ruth's plan, it was his too. I closed my laptop. The finality of it all hit me. I was done. This is the last time any of you will see me, I said, turning to walk away. Tina followed me, putting a hand on my shoulder. You handled it like a queen, she said softly. Seriously, you should have slapped someone. But that was better. We walked out of the venue together, and as I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. It was Chu again. You are not going to believe this, she said. Madison's already posting Instagram stories, acting like she just got engaged to Derek. Future misses and upgrade all over her feed. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because at that point, what else could I do? By the end of the day, the rumors started circulating. People were texting me, asking why the wedding was cancelled so suddenly. Ruth tried to spin it as mutual differences, but no one believed it for long. Madison couldn't keep her mouth shut, and by the next week, everyone knew the truth. And as for Derek, he stuck with Madison for about 3 weeks, until she realized the fancy lifestyle she had been promised didn't exist. No wedding, no lavish lifestyle, no cash, just Derek and his miserable, unremarkable personality. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Ruth and Walter lost most of their friends when the truth came out. Madison, ever the opportunist, was roasted online. As for me, I was free. I didn't need a wedding. I didn't need Derek. I didn't need the lies, the manipulation, or the facade of a perfect life. I spent the weekend with my real friends, throwing the most ridiculous non-wedding party you could imagine. Champagne, karaoke, and even my wedding cake, which I smashed with a fork for the final touch. By the time the night ended, I realized something. I wasn't sad anymore. I was free, and that felt better than any wedding ever could.